Welcome to Dark Corners with David Allen Voyles. Dark Corners is brought to you by Gestalt Media, an independent publishing company dedicated to serving independent authors. Matinee Special by David Allen Voyles. This next exit should be ours according to what the bartender told us. Exit 34. Robert looked up from the map on his phone. Allen nodded and shifted lanes for the approaching off-ramp. Thank God. I'm starving, Allen said. As he approached the stop sign at the end of the ramp, he peered over the steering wheel, looking right and left to see which way he should turn. Odd that there's no sign indicating the name of the town, just the exit sign. Looks like there may be some buildings to the right. Allen pulled onto the two-lane highway and headed east, as Robert had suggested. No telling what kind of restaurants they have in this little town, Robert said. I'd like to get something besides fast food if we can. Let me see what I can find for Mortville restaurants. His fingers flew across the face of his phone, and then he shook his head and blew out his cheeks in a little puff of frustration. Ah, damn. I got no phone service. I'm dead in the water here. No problem. Looks like we're coming into the main part of this teeming metropolis. We'll just cruise Main Street here. There's likely to be at least one good mom-and-pop restaurant that the locals like. I sure as hell hope that Brand the bartender knew what he was talking about in recommending this little town, Robert said, frowning as he surveyed the shops on either side of the road. These little southern towns make me nervous. If you can't trust a gay bartender about knowing where the best antique shops are, then you might as well prepare for Armageddon. Allen grinned and gave his husband a playful shove. Just keep your eyes on the road, mister, Robert answered, smiling at last. Wait, that looks like something up ahead on the left. A sidewalk sign indicated the daily lunch special for a small restaurant, the Corner Kitchen. They were traveling slowly enough that Allen was able to make the left turn onto the side street in front of the cafe. Once he was far enough past the fire hydrant so as not to get ticketed, he parked on the street and the two men got out of their car and stretched in the warm sunlight. They paused before entering the restaurant to look up and down the main street they had just traveled. Looks like Mayberry, huh? Allen said. And just about as diverse. A moderate number of people walked the sidewalks. Here and there, people stood in doorways, and a few old men sat on benches that had been placed intermittently along the way. They entered the cafe and easily found a table as there were only two others occupied. A cheery young woman, barely out of her teens, with a blonde ponytail set menus before them. Welcome to the Corner Kitchen. I'm Betty, and I'll be your server. Can I get you something to drink while you look over your menus? Just water for me, thanks, said Allen. I'll have a beer, Robert said, and then added quickly, This isn't a dry county, is it? Betty laughed. No, you can get anything you want here. Anything? Robert said. Well, in that case, I'd love a reverse Manhattan, like they make in the Roosevelt Room in Austin. He smiled at her with a raised eyebrow. Oh, come on, Robert, don't be a jerk. Allen smiled apologetically at the woman and shook his head. No, we can handle that, Betty said. 2 ounces of vermouth blend, 1 ounce of rye whiskey, and 2 dashes of Angostura bitters, right? Robert nodded at her with his mouth hanging open. And a garnish of... He paused, waiting to see if she would finish this little miracle. A Marasca cherry. The two men broke out in laughter as their waitress smiled politely. Yes, please, Robert stammered. You sure you don't want something more than just water? He asked Allen. Well, maybe a beer. Sure, what can I get you? Betty asked with a smile. Oh, whatever you've got on tap is fine. Go ahead and go for it, Allen. You can get whatever you want. You love that Asheville beer, Cold Mountain. Oh, that's seasonal. They aren't going to be able to... We have Cold Mountain. From Highland Brewing? Now it was Allen's turn to be jaw-droppingly astonished. Well, fine. I have a Cold Mountain, then. The pretty blonde smiled, turned, and walked briskly back into the kitchen. That was incredible, Allen said. Yeah, tell me about it. Now let's see what's on the menu here. When the men were well into their meal, Betty checked to see how they were enjoying their broiled trout and chicken Alfredo. "It's wonderful," Robert said. "Please tell your chef we're thrilled." Alan nodded while he swallowed quickly, anxious to respond as well. "Yes, we consider ourselves to be rather, particular about our food, and this is as good as anything we've had back home in Austin. And we have some pretty fine restaurants." "Well, thanks. I'll do that," she said. "And if you don't mind," Robert asked, "can you tell us where we might find some good antique shops around here? We were told that Mortville is kind of a gold mine in that area." "Yes, we got a couple of places you probably like. There are two right here on the main drag. Simpson's just 3 doors down, and the Wagon Wheel on the other side of the street about 2 blocks down." "Seems a bit odd, doesn't it, to have several antique stores in such a small town?" Robert asked. "Well, when folks die around here, they often have furniture that's been in their families for years, and sometimes there aren't any children left to take it. That, or the survivors want more modern stuff." "I guess that makes sense," Alan said. "Is there anything else to do or see while we're here?" "I'd be sure to catch the matinee special at the Orpheum. It's kind of a special thing here," Betty said. "Oh? What's playing?" Robert asked. "No telling. It's always changing. But they kind of pride themselves over there on having unique shows, things not on the common circuit." She smiled at them and added, "Can I get either of you a refill on those drinks?" Alan shook his head and Robert said, "No thanks. More than one this early and I'll just get sleepy. But this has been great." When they had finished their meal, they paid, adding a generous tip in gratitude for the excellent service and food, and walked out into the brilliant sunshine again. "Ready for some serious shopping?" Alan said, holding his hand over his eyes as he scanned the street both ways. "Might as well check out Simpson's first, right?" The two walked to the store that was on the same side of the street, and immediately upon entering reveled in the smell of furniture polish and the sound their footsteps made on the old hardwood floors. "Can I help you gentlemen find anything in particular?" said a gray-haired woman with glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. "Just browsing, really," Robert said. "I'd love to see any vintage greeting cards you might have, especially Christmas cards. I have quite a few, but I'm always looking to add to the collection." "Certainly. We have some really interesting Victorian cards in the back. Follow me." As they walked past rows of bookcases, cabinets, and rocking chairs, she added, "You must be in the business. We don't get too many tourists in our small town." "No, it's just a hobby for both of us," Alan answered. "We got a tip while we were vacationing in Asheville and decided to do a little exploring here." "I'm afraid you won't find much other entertainment in Mortville," she said, looking back at them with a grin. "Although you could catch the matinee special at the movie house." "You're the second person to suggest that," Alan said. "I think we'll just have to check that out while we're here." The woman stopped at a table with a rack of old greeting cards, looked at both Alan and Robert closely, and said, "Yes, you really should." She continued to look at them intently with a smile that showed her teeth, long enough for the two men to look at each other and grin as well. She eventually broke the awkward silence by saying, "Well, here are the cards. Just holler if you need any help finding anything else." "We sure will," Robert said to her back as she walked back to the front of the store. "That was a little weird, right?" Robert said under his breath. "Definitely. Thumb through these cards and let's just take a quick spin around the shop and head on over to the other place." Alan didn't find anything in the card racks that he couldn't live without, so the two men made their way toward the entrance at a pace just leisurely enough as to avoid appearing rude. Back out on the street, they squinted with the bright sunlight and continued their way to a shop that displayed a large wooden wheel over the double doors. "That has to be it," Robert said, and seeing no traffic in either direction, the two jaywalked across the street, making a direct line to the store. The air-conditioned shop was a pleasant relief from the heat as they were greeted immediately by a chubby, goateed man with long graying hair pulled back into a ponytail in his 50s, wearing leather sandals with gray socks. "Morning, gents. Or I guess it's really afternoon, isn't it? Easy to lose track of time in here. Make yourself at home." The sound of Crossroads from an old record player, complete with the pops and crackles of old vinyl, filled the air. "Is that Robert Johnson?" Alan asked, his astonishment clear in his voice. "It sure as hell ain't Eric Clapton, is it?" he chuckled. Yep, that's the one and only, singing his old classic. Is it for sale? Everything's for sale, ultimately. Am I right? He said with a wink. But I'd have to charge a pretty penny for that one. If you find anything you like in my collection, just ask. We might be able to agree on a price you can live with. Well, to tell the truth, I'm not really a collector of old records, just a fan, Allen said. I understand, the shopkeeper said. Looking for anything in particular, or just browsing? Poking around in these old shops is kind of a hobby for us, Robert said, interjecting himself into the conversation. Finding an unexpected treasure would be a highlight of our vacation. Well, look around. You might get lucky. Just ask if you see anything of interest. Will do, Allen said. He took a few steps further into the store and then turned back. Well, let me ask you something, if you don't mind. We keep hearing of a matinee special playing at a movie theater in town. What's so special about this movie? The storekeeper took a second to answer, studying Allen before he answered. Robert turned back from his perusal of some Cherokee woven baskets, curious to listen because of the pause. I think you two might find it of interest, he said finally. We don't get the usual releases here. The owner of the Orpheum has a unique taste in film, I guess you'd say. Unique? Allen asked. In what way? The shopkeeper once again took a moment to answer. They're not for everybody. Allen and Robert looked at each other again. What are they, porno flicks? Robert asked. No, nothing like that. At least not that I know of. They're just not like anything else. They're kind of hard to explain. Yeah, apparently, Robert said. The clerk looked at them with narrowed eyes and smiled. I think you two would find them especially interesting. Robert seemed to bristle, his posture becoming stiff. Recognizing the warning signs, Allen stepped over to intercede if necessary. What do you mean by that? The shopkeeper was either oblivious of any affront he may have made, or he just didn't care. The matinees at the Orpheum are one of a kind, something you won't find anywhere else. You guys seem like you'd appreciate rarities. Once again, Robert and Allen exchanged a glance. So what's showing today? Allen asked. I have no idea. It's different every day. The atmosphere in the antique shop seemed to have gotten thicker than when they had entered. The air was heavy, and the record, which had automatically started over again, sounded like it came from further away. The shopkeeper's smile now seemed taunting. And the best thing of all is, the clerk continued, you can't beat the price. He paused, savoring their full attention. Free. Free, Robert repeated flatly, finding the answer hard to swallow. This town has one movie theater, and they don't charge admission? You got it, the shopkeeper said. Popcorn's free, too, and if you're lucky, there might even be free beer. That's the craziest thing I've ever heard, Allen said. The owner of the Orpheum's not worried about making money. You know, I've got to admit, I'm hooked. Robert's anger had dissolved as quickly as it had risen. I think we should check it out. What time does the matinee start? Allen asked. I don't know, the shopkeeper said. It always changes. Robert pulled out his smartphone. I'll check online. What did you say the name of the theater was again? The Orpheus? Orpheum, Allen corrected, and the clerk nodded. Robert frowned. I still can't get a connection on my phone. Allen reached in his pocket and pulled out his cell to check too. Yeah, I don't have a signal either. The two men looked at the shopkeeper, who just shrugged. Could you check yours? Robert asked. I don't have a smartphone or a computer, he said. Nothing but antiques here, he smiled. Robert and Allen looked at each other, silently asking each other if they thought they were being put on. Best thing to do is just go there and see. Well, where is the Orpheum? Allen asked. Right at the center of town, biggest building in town. Looks like an old opera house. You can't miss it. The visiting couple looked at each other and shrugged. Well, thanks, Allen said. Guess we'll go check it out. If we've missed the show, we might be back. I'd like to look at some of that stained glass you've got hanging back there. I'll be here, the clerk said. The heat was oppressive when they stepped out of the shop. Well, which way? Robert asked, squinting into the sun. Looks like that's it right down there. Alan pointed further down the street in the same direction they had been walking from the cafe. The street ended at what appeared to be something much like a town square, but instead of a municipal town hall building, an ornate, old-fashioned theater stood there. "How did we not see that before? It's right there," Robert said as he began to walk toward it. "I don't know. The sun's so bright and it's so hot. Maybe..." Alan's voice trailed off, and they walked the rest of the way in silence. The theater appeared to be 2 stories high, with an elaborate marquee projecting out over the sidewalk in front of the entrance that would likely be illuminated at night. No one sat at the window for the ticket booth to the left of the double glass doors. "Nothing on the marquee," Robert said. "Maybe you're supposed to go on inside?" He pulled on the handle on one of the doors, which opened easily. He raised his eyebrows and held the door for Alan to enter. Alan hesitated, then stepped inside into the theater foyer, and Robert followed. The smell of freshly made buttered popcorn hit them immediately. Music played faintly over hidden speakers. "Oh, sweet. Looks like they're preparing for somebody," Robert said. Red and white striped paper containers filled with popcorn sat on the concession counter. A metal tub filled with ice and cans of beer and soda sat under a poster for Carnival of Souls. Robert grabbed a packet of popcorn and pulled a beer from the tub. "What are you doing? You can't just grab stuff without paying." "The guy at the wagon wheel said they had free concessions. Come on, loosen up. If they didn't want people to take the stuff, they wouldn't leave it out." "So where is everyone?" "I don't know. Maybe they knew when the show was supposed to start. Grab a beer and let's check out the theater. And get your own popcorn so I don't have to share." Alan followed Robert to the black doors that led into the theater, but refrained from getting any of the refreshments. Once inside, they stopped to let their eyes adjust to the low lighting. 3 sections of seats were laid out with 2 aisles that ran to the front of the theater. If a movie screen was present, it was hidden behind closed curtains made of deep red velvet with gold trim. "Oh my God, there's actually a balcony." Alan looked to where Robert was pointing, and indeed a balcony of seats 3 rows deep ran around the sides and apparently above them in the center. No one else was in the theater, but the same music they heard in the foyer played over the sound system. Without warning, the music stopped abruptly. "Ladies and gentlemen, the movie will start in 5 minutes. "Looks like we timed it just right," Robert said. "Let's get our seats." "Sure you don't want to get something to eat or drink?" Alan shook his head and followed Robert down about halfway down the aisle, where they then sidestepped their way over to the center of the row so that they sat near the mid-center of the theater. "This is some place, huh?" Robert said with his mouth full of popcorn. "Yeah, it's something all right." Alan examined the walls around them. "Those light fixtures look kind of creepy." The sconces he indicated had faces that looked like those on the dragons they had seen in parades in Chinatown and San Francisco. "Creepy in a cool way," Robert agreed. Just then the music stopped abruptly again, the lights got even dimmer, and the curtains began to open. "Yes, finally, we get to see what this mystery movie is." The sound of a projector came from behind them, and the screen came to light. The scene was immediately recognizable as being the main street of Mortville. "Oh, home movies," Robert said, the disappointment clearly evident in his voice. "Maybe it's just an ad or a short film before the feature." Robert shrugged and nodded. "Here, have some popcorn," he said, offering the container. "I was just kidding before." Alan shook his head and then did a double take of what was being projected on the screen. The camera followed 2 men as they entered the corner kitchen. "Hey, that's us," Robert said. Sure enough, the scene continued to show Robert and Alan being seated by Betty, the friendly waitress who had served them lunch. The dialogue was exactly as they remembered, including their surprise at getting a reverse Manhattan and a cold mountain. "What the hell's going on?" "I don't know," Alan said softly, and kept staring at the screen. The scene changed, so that next they saw themselves walking down the street as they made their way into Simpson's, the first antique store. Once they entered, the point of view shifted, so that they were viewed from the back of the store. They followed the older woman to the back, where close-ups showed the entire conversation they had with the shop owner, including a close-up of her odd smile after telling them about the matinee special. Seeing her expression on the large screen was even more frightening than when they had experienced it live. The scene changed again so that they saw themselves entering the wagon wheel. Robert stared at the screen dumbfounded, his drink and popcorn forgotten. Again, the scene's focus was such that the close-ups were shown of their faces as they conversed with the long-haired clerk in that store. His grinning face, shown on such a large scale, seemed even more sinister as he answered their questions about the Orpheum. "Robert, let's get out of here. This is freaking me out." Alan gripped Robert's arm where it sat on the armrest between them. "Hang on a minute. I want to see where this is going." The image on the screen then showed the two men entering the theater entrance, and Robert getting his popcorn and beer. The camera followed them into the dim theater and stopping just inside the darkened auditorium. Alan's heart was pounding, and he found it hard to breathe. He glanced back to the exits where he longed to go. He saw with astonishment that other people now sat scattered about the theater. The flickering light from the screen made their faces jump unnaturally, but they also looked terribly wrong. Their faces were unnaturally pale. Dark circles surrounded their eyes. Movement made Alan look to the aisle where they had walked minutes before. Coming down the aisle was the clerk from the wagon wheel, only now he shambled like a figure from a zombie movie. His skin was pale, his cheeks sunken in. He made his ambling way to the row behind theirs and began to pull himself into the center, closer to where they were sitting. The sound of a theater seat bouncing made Alan turn to his right in a panic. Betty, their waitress from the corner kitchen, was crawling towards him on all fours, bumping the seats as she got closer. One eye, covered in a gray, thin film, caught the light from the screen. The other appeared to have been long missing. From the strobing light, he could make out the dried, wrinkled tissue on the back of the empty socket. Alan was paralyzed with fear. He couldn't even scream, and he shut his eyes tight. The air that had seemed air-conditioned now was warm, and the smell of decay nearly made him retch. "Robert," he whispered. No answer. "Robert," he managed to croak out louder. Still no answer. He forced himself to open his eyes to look at his husband. A corpse stared back at him, but obviously the corpse of the man he knew and loved. Alan groaned and looked up at the screen. The scene now focused on the two of them, much like a jumbotron at sporting events. But instead of showing happy lovers at a game, the screen was filled with two grinning skeletons, partially covered in decaying clothes and rotting flesh, sitting in the Orpheum Theater. Guests who would view the matinee special forever. That concludes this episode of Dark Corners with David Allen Voyles. Music was provided by Mombi Uhlman. To find other works by David Allen Voyles and keep up with all his projects, please visit his official author website, davidallenvoyles.com. Hope to meet you again soon in the Dark Corners.